what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to The Culture Code, a 5-episode pulse check series where leadership, multicultural marketing, and technology collide. I'm your host, Christian Ponce, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated my career to marketing communications and public relations with a focus on inclusive and multicultural marketing. As I often say, marketing is my passion, but multicultural marketing is my calling. We'll explore how higher education institutions can better connect with diverse and multicultural audiences, leverage technology, and implement best-in-class outreach marketing practices to advance your brand's mission. Each episode explores different aspects of the marketing mainstream. Experts, leaders, and practitioners share valuable insights and practical advice on creating culturally relevant campaigns to help your institution stand out from the sea of sameness. So buckle up as we soar to new heights and reach incredible marketing destinations. This is Culture Code. Sean bienvenidos. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the Culture Code. This is Christian Ponce, your host, and today we are going to have an episode on women leadership in empower future generations in higher ed. Today we have with us Dr. Cristina Alcalde. She is an expert in gender and women's studies scholar and an anthropologist whose research focuses on racialization, gender migration, gender violence, and exclusion. As Vice President for Transformational and Inclusive Excellence at Miami University, she leads inclusion efforts, working closely with students, faculty, and staff. Dr. Alcalde is the author of Peruvian Lives Across Borders, University of Illinois Press 2018, and The Woman in the Violence, Vanderbilt University Press 2010. She has co-edited several books, including Dismantling Whiteness, Purdue University Press 2022, Me Too and Beyond, University Press of Kentucky 2022, and Provocations, University of California Press 2015. Her work has appeared in numerous journals such as Latin American and Caribbean Ethnic Studies, Meridian's Latin American Perspectives, Latino Studies, and Feminist Formations. She also has contributed to several edited volumes on gender-based violence and feminist scholarship. Dr. Alcalde, welcome to the episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So let's get into the episode. Today's conversation, obviously, want to explore quick questions about women's leadership in higher education, focusing on childhood inspiration, challenges Latinas face, and how women can shape the future of academia. We can discuss the importance of mentorship and strategies universities can adopt to support young women aspiring to leadership roles. And finally, we can consider how emerging technologies and digital platforms can promote gender equity and inclusion in academic and global contexts. I would like to start the episode by talking a little bit about some of these issues that we have with the Latino community. I would like to say that remind the audience that projections by the U.S. Census estimate that by 2060, 1 out of 3 Americans will be Latino or Hispanic or Latina. So any issues or an attainment gap with the Hispanic population is no longer an isolated issue. It's now part of the United States as a problem, so it's an American issue. So according to Excelencia en Educación, or Excelencia in Education, a Hispanic think tank, at 4-year institutions, 52% of Latino students graduated, while 65% of their white peers graduated. So we have a 13-point difference. And I think that this is an issue that we have to tackle. Also, in 2-year institutions, graduation rates showed a 5-point difference, with 33% of Latino students graduating compared to 38% of their white classmates. Bottom line is Hispanic students are falling behind, and we need to challenge this issue. So I think it's always important to bring to the show inspiring stories, Dr. Alcalde, and I think you are one. You are an inspiring story. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, and what inspired you as a young little girl to pursue education at the highest possible level. Was that inspired or by your parents?
Sure. And before I get into it, I also just want to say I'm so glad you shared all those points before, because they are so important, of really important context for this conversation. So thank you for sharing that. It's a nice reminder for all of us, for me too, of the importance of focusing on Latinas and Latina people. So for me, I grew up in Peru and in the US, and I moved around quite a bit. And my family, we originally, and I say originally because there was really quite a lot of back and forth between the US and Peru. We originally moved to the US in the 80s when I was 7, about to be 8 years old. And at that time, there was quite a bit of political violence in Peru. And we moved to Virginia because my father had been awarded a fellowship to pursue his PhD studies. So it was because of higher ed. I had lived abroad earlier in my life, but really I was so young that it didn't really have an impact on me. But at 7, 8 years old, moving to the US was a totally different world. Like everything, the smells, the people, the food, the language, everything was different. And from really very early on, I was in situations in which I was the first or the only. And I learned really, really quickly from my parents and from our moves the value of curiosity about other people, about the place we found ourselves in, about differences, and really about why things are the way they are, and oftentimes how we can change them or why it's important to try to change those things. So my upbringing was that of an immigrant, but going back and forth. And my parents played and continued to play a huge role in my relationship to higher ed.
Well, thank you. And you mentioned that you traveled back and forth between Peru and the United States. You mentioned how there was a culture shock in a way. Everything was different. Did your cultural background shape your views, I think, in higher education?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's such a great question. And I'm sure in many ways that I still am learning, right? Because I'm still in this. But because my parents really focused so much on curiosity and exposure to individuals and places from different backgrounds, that really helped me and my brother and my sister really focus on education as a way to move forward, as a way to understand the world. Also, my parents both worked as librarians for a long time, so books were really valued in our home. And as we moved, one of the constants we had was each other, of course, but also books. So we learned all about new worlds through people we met, but also through all these amazing books about places and different histories that I would never have been exposed to otherwise. And my parents, their move from Peru also, it was really difficult for them. And so I think they're modeling how to do that and still maintaining those really close family ties that were so important to them and continue to be so important to us has really shaped how I see the world.
Well, thank you. So going back to the conversation earlier, Christina, when we were talking about that 13% graduation rate gap between Hispanics and white peers, for example, do you think that universities, colleges, institutions should take into consideration cultural aspects of the Latino community in order to help reduce that gap, not only when recruiting students, but also to retain them?
Yeah, I think everything we do has to be to make higher education as accessible as possible to everyone. And given especially the realities that we live in, as you and I both know, Latino or Hispanic isn't one thing. There's so much diversity within that. And so just beginning to understand what Latino students need and want and what different backgrounds are included in that will be a huge step. So I think as we think of not only recruitment and retention, I think it's really important to learn from our students. There are still so many opportunities to be able to learn about Latinx students, about faculty, about staff, about what values are important, about the role of families in decisions about college and about what to study and how to relate to others. So I think it is really critical. It's cultural. It's part of our everyday life, and it informs and helps us be successful.
So going back to what you mentioned about the Latinos or Latine or the Hispanic community is not a monolith, basically is very diverse.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And, for example, we come from 20 plus countries who speak Spanish, but can you talk about some of those cultural nuances between North America, like Mexican Hispanics or Central American, South Americans, and even Spaniards? Are there some cultural nuances that you can touch on, and then we'll talk a little bit about the concept of family because you brought that up.
Yeah, I think there, and I know you and I have talked about this too, and I've loved our conversations about that. It's just there, just the two of us, for example, we've had the pleasure of being able to work in the same institution for some time, right? But we bring very different backgrounds to the work we do and very different lenses. So I think even across different identities, there are so many differences. And oftentimes when I was growing up, it was just the idea of people didn't even know where Peru was. So I'm originally from Peru, right? And it was just like, Peru, what's that? So if I'd said Mexico, maybe, but even Mexico obviously is so diverse. There's so many differences. And so I think just there's a need for more information and more knowledge about what we mean by even not only Latina, Latino, Latina, Latinx, but Latin America.
Hmm.
Because also we come from all sorts of backgrounds. Some of us are immigrants. So I think also understanding, right, that some are immigrants, some are not, even what it means to be an immigrant. I think I
Right.
shared a little bit ago that I went back and forth. Yeah, so that's perhaps not the traditional immigrant background that where you come and you stay and that's it. So there are so many differences, and at the same time, we do have some similarities. But I will say, even the way different folks speak and what languages we speak, right? Because I think oftentimes folks might think that we speak Spanish, that everyone speaks Spanish, but there's so many indigenous languages, and that doesn't even begin to touch on the whole history of colonialism, right? And there's so many different foods. The number of times that I've gone someplace and there are just so many assumptions, and it's all about good intentions, but I think it's really difficult when just broadly as a society, we still don't have very much information about the diversity within Latin America and within the Latinx population here in the US. And I think for students, that's really difficult when they're sometimes perhaps people assume that they're all the same, right? Or that they all have the same needs, or to say Latina or Latinx or Hispanic is enough. And suddenly that means everything. That, doesn't take into consideration our different economic backgrounds or different gender identities. So many different things. And as with any other population, we
That's a great.
just need to be more subtle. Go ahead.
Hey, it's Mallory. Quick break from the show. If you're in admissions, you're probably exhausted. Everyone wants more apps, more personalization, faster turnaround, but no one's giving you more staff, more hours, or more budget. That's where a digital workforce comes in. Not bots, not automation, actual AI teammates that take work off of your team's plate without dropping the ball. At the Engage Summit this June, you'll see how schools are already doing this with Bolt agents from Element 451. Register at enrollify.org/engage and use the special code ENGAGE50 for $50 off. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
That's a great point. And you mentioned family. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of family for higher ed and for the decision process, even if somebody's going to go to college? And how does that look like? What has your experience been?
Yeah. And maybe I'll start with the personal, which is, when I was going to go to college in the US too. So in the US, we have this idea of, and this model, right? There's a great model of you go away to college. This is part of your coming of age and you learn different things. And you have this, traditionally, this residential campus experience, right? In many other parts of the world, it's not that way. And when I was going to start college, it was more about why would you be so far away from family? You're still very young. And so I didn't go away to college very far. I also didn't live on campus.
Hmm.
Right? I lived with my family part of the time, then I lived with my parents part of the time, then with my sister. And so I think just all those things, sometimes we also, as an anthropologist, sometimes there's a little bit of, maybe ethnocentrism might be too strong of a term,
Hmm.
but there's a little bit of misunderstanding of what college students writ large want and what they can do. So families play a huge role. In my case, my family played a huge role in what was possible, not only in shaping my views and in really valuing higher ed, but also even the idea of where I could go, how far away from them they felt comfortable with me being. And I think many institutions are not yet equipped to really support the whole decision-making process for many students, which includes their families for many of us.
100%. So I was just talking to some colleagues from Old Dominion University, and they create special campus events or orientation events for Hispanic communities. And their Latino events, when they're having like an open day or student day or information like a workshop or whatever, in the white peers, they bring usually their dad or mom and the student. That's it. Hispanics, they bring everybody. The mom comes, the kids come, the siblings come, and they have to have, like, for children, like drawing books and color paint and like things to color books and all of that, because they need to be entertained. So it's different. I mean, it's just the whole concept of going to college together almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, they're all different experiences. And for some Latinos, yes, it will be just them and their parent. But for others, yes, it'll be the whole extended family. And I think we need to leave space for all those possibilities and to make sure that we understand that all of that is good. All of that is welcome, right?
That's great. So, Dr. Alcalde, what motivated you to pursue leadership in higher education? In particularly, I'm interested hearing more about what challenges have you faced as a Latina in this space, if any.
Yeah, so I think probably like many women of color, I didn't really see myself as a leader or entering administration in higher ed. It was mostly, I wouldn't say accidental, but it wasn't very smooth. It was organic in that for me, many of my research areas really focus on things that I get to focus on as an administrator and someone with a formal leadership role. And it was exciting to be able to do that because I wanted to have a greater impact. And so my road to leadership and formal leadership roles was about having a greater impact. And by being able to have these leadership roles, I also hoped that I can model something slightly different than the more traditional leadership that's based more on sometimes a lack of trust, being less vulnerable, having to make unilateral decisions, forcefulness, all those things that really I don't identify with. And I think many people don't identify with. And so it was also about being able to model that for others, and not just for women and not just for Latinas, but just more broadly. It doesn't serve us well to only have one or very few types of leadership models. And for me, that was really important. Although, when I was younger, I remember always hearing and knowing that my grandmothers, of course, neither one of them could pursue higher ed. They both wanted to, though. So it's also about, these were two incredibly strong women in my life. And so also thinking about, why can't we? Right. Like why can't we change things? So whatever we're talking about, it's okay. We can do the research. We can find out more. We can learn. We can be curious. And sometimes we need to change things because higher ed is very much a microcosm of society, which means we have hierarchies, we have biases, we have all these different things. And so we also need to change some things about that.
100%. That's a great point. So to me, personally speaking, I'm a girl dad. I have 3 daughters. And so women leadership I'm very biased. I'm not going to lie. So women leadership it's important to me. How do you think women in general, and Latinas in particular, can shape the future of higher education and empower the next generation? What's needed or required?
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do is, again, show how many types of leadership there can be and just be our full selves. I think in general, there's so much richness that we sometimes don't see. And so I think we can bring our full selves. We can, whether it's challenges in work-life balance or bringing our whole families or something else, just we are complex beings. And being able to model that, I think, is really important. I think also given the population in the U.S., it's really critical. We know we constantly talk about being able to see it, to be it, but we really need to do that. Growing up, I didn't really have role models or others who were in leadership roles in higher ed, who I thought I could really relate to. And that's okay. Many people have that experience, but really it shouldn't be okay. We want to make sure that other people do have folks that they can see and say, okay, that person has a similar trajectory to me, or I can have a similar trajectory to that person. Right? It doesn't mean you need to be like that person. We never want to recreate who we are, but we want to be able to open the way so others can be their full selves. And I think that's kind of the moment that we're in right now, that we need to continue to push to be able to see what's possible. And it doesn't mean there aren't challenges, right? I mean, I think like many others, microaggressions, macroaggressions, assumptions, ideas about not belonging in certain spaces, about not belonging in certain roles, they abound. But
Right.
still, being able to be at the table
Mhm.
and being able to use your skills to at least try to bring about change is amazing. And so I think, moving more women and women of color and Latinas into leadership roles will be so important.
So that's a great segue for the next question I have as part of the conversation, because you and I were talking before we started this podcast episode that in higher ed, whether you're in marketing or you're a faculty member or you are doing some type of a different administration work, we're all advocates for higher ed. And that means that we need to be mentors. Some of us have the opportunity to be leaders in this space, and I think mentorship is important. Do you think that there's maybe a couple of strategies that colleges and universities can implement to support and mentor young female students aspiring to leadership roles?
Yeah, and I think at the broadest level too, maybe a step back from a strategy is also an approach. So an approach to representation, an approach to being reflective about who's at the table and who's in senior leadership roles. So first, kind of a mapping of who's there, why they're there, who's missing, and why they're missing, right? So, and then a strategy as to how they're going to make sure and how we're going to make sure that all feel represented, not only in senior leadership roles, but in the classroom, right? And so I think that'll be really critical. But at first, it takes the mindset of I need to acknowledge who's here, why they're here, who's missing, who we're excluding. So that's the first step, because I think sometimes we run to strategies and we really want to create strategies, but we haven't acknowledged the issue. And acknowledging the issue can be quite uncomfortable. And I think we need to kind of sit with that for a bit to be able to understand and do research, do benchmarking, whatever we need to do to be able to find a way forward. I think there are lots of programs that could support, for example, faculty, staff, administrators going into K through 12 schools to be able to talk about their own leadership trajectories. College students being supported to go and speak in middle schools or in high school to talk about why they decided to go to college, why they decided to have a particular leadership role, right? And I think just as like for faculty and staff, we have many solid mentoring programs. We need those for students, but we also need, I think, mentoring programs and support and resources for leaders, because as leaders, we don't necessarily know what it is to be a mentor. We all want to mentor, but we also need support. So I think, making sure that we actually come up not only with broad programs, but what resources are we providing mentors? What support are we providing mentors? And I think there are lots of opportunities there to think of, whether it's workshops for how to mentor, how to be a mentor, or anything else along those lines. I think that that's something that is definitely a need.
That's great. Thank you so much. In this series, I'm always talking about technology. Do you know any emerging technologies or digital platforms that we can use to advance gender equity or inclusion in academic global context? Do you know if there's any AI tools helping with inclusion work?
I would love for there to be more. I think, overall, what I would say is, I think with emerging technologies and platforms, more representation is always important. So making sure that gender equity is being modeled there, or that there are strategies being shared through those. But I think even things like courses, so digital platforms that actually allow women in remote areas or students who might otherwise not have access to that to be able to have access to knowledge, or to podcasts, right? Like this one, or to have other things. That's really critical. And I think that contributes also to gender equity and inclusion and to networking. And to your question of mentoring, that's also a way through digital platforms that we can match people with mentors, right? We can match women with other mentors. And so I think all of those are available tools. It's just how we use them. And with AI, I think anything that allows us to gather more information and gain more knowledge can be really useful. I think one thing is, given that women do experience so much more cyberbullying and so much more online abuse online, it might be useful to also be able to, and racism online, it might be useful to also use AI tools to address that, to at least identify spaces that are safer or that can be changed.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. In fact, my next episode is going to be focused entirely on AI and on technologies. And while there's a lot of work to be done, I think it's important to make us think about how are we using those tools and how can we make it more equitable and accessible. Because the fact is that they're not yet. And you bring about a very, very good point. Cristina, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for all you do for higher education and as we work together for the common good and the future of leaders in America. Thank you for being here. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Christian Ponce, your host with the Culture Code. Tune in next week to discuss AI and technologies in multicultural marketing.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.